as you mentioned earlier, that Genesis lays out a whole lot of what it means to live in this world and so forth, and what does marriage look like.
Yeah.
One of the things you see in Genesis is a lot of messy examples,
Mhm.
and you see the patriarchs with multiple wives. You see lying going on, and if someone's to read Genesis and think, how do I get guidance for my life from Genesis when you have all these messy examples? Can you
Yeah.
walk through that? What does it look like? What should our marriages look like, and so forth from the book of Genesis?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you have God's design for marriage laid out in Genesis 2:24. A man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. God's design is for one man, one woman, in a committed relationship, until death do you part. So then the question, and then Jesus affirms that in Matthew 19. So the question is, how do we explain kind of what's going on, um, in the Old Testament? And it's a difficult question, but I think even throughout the Old Testament there's clear evidence of God's design. So 99.9% when when law talks about these things, it's always singular. I mean, it's plural, women, men are not used, so it's reinforcing that. And all of the examples in the Old Testament of a polygamous relationship, they're not happy. I mean, they're full of conflict. They're difficult situations, which just again reinforces God's design. The question is, God allows it. In Abraham's situation, his relationship with Hagar really is Sarah's suggestion because she is not producing an heir, and it's really a human response of unbelief. They don't believe in the promise of God that God would send an heir through Abraham and Sarah, and so that's a sinful response there. Jacob himself is sort of deceived into this relationship by Laban. I mean, Jacob, in essence, meets his match in Laban in terms of deceitfulness. And so instead of getting Rachel, he got Leah after working for 7 years. And then at the end of that wedding feast, I think if you read Genesis, he does get Rachel, but he has to work 7 more years. So you've got two women, and it's just a situation of conflict. There's a lot of questions, but I think ultimately, overall, the Old Testament underscores God's original design, even though you see these examples, um, and they don't work out very well. And so part of what we can learn from this is when you stray from God's design, these problems arise, in your life. And for a period there, Jacob is just passive. I mean, he's passed around from wife to wife, and then they get their handmaidens involved. There's kind of a race for children. So it really does become a mess. I think God does use that in Jacob's life to bring him to a place where there's no way he can scheme his way out of this. And he eventually, in that story, emerges as the leader of the family. But part of that God uses, I think, to bring him to a place to trust in God. So there's a variety of ways you could talk about some of these stories. Certainly, Joseph is a good example of this. I mean, he's 30 years old when he's made second in command of Egypt, and he's given a wife who is the daughter of a priestess. And of course, the question is, will he remain faithful? And he does, partly evidenced in the fact that he uses Hebrew names for his two children. So Joseph is, of course, marrying the daughter of an Egyptian priestess is a priest is a bit strange, but Joseph himself, I think, shows would be an example in Genesis of someone who is living more according to God's design.
Yeah, I think a helpful hermeneutical principle too is just because something happens doesn't mean it's normative for what we ought to do. That you have to test those things with the clear statements that say, "Here's what you're supposed to do." And Jacob, Abraham, they weren't errorless in their lives.
No, that's a great point. And I think that's part of the role of the law just because something is in the law, especially the covenant code, not the Ten Commandments, but the covenant code, it's regulating these kinds of situations that are arising in the nation of Israel. So there's a civil component to that, trying to regulate situations. It's not saying these are necessarily good situations, but law tries to regulate situations that arise in a society. So that's a really good point to make. Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up here, you've written a commentary on Genesis. Do you have any other recommendations for someone who might be working on Genesis or trying to understand it, maybe at various levels?
Yeah, that's a good question. I could name a couple of commentaries. I don't know. I mean, the book of Exodus has a couple of really good theologies that have been written on it, and maybe there are for Genesis, and I just haven't come across them. Currid has a commentary on Genesis. Matthewson, which used to be the New American Commentary series, I don't know if that series is still in existence, but he has a two-volume commentary that was very helpful to me when I was writing my commentary. And I'm sure there are others. And those two commentaries, especially Matthewson, it would be a very detailed, and Currid's is as well, interacting with the Hebrew. But Currid's is good because it talks a lot about what the text means for us today. So it has a section at the end. So those are just two that I would
Okay.
mention. Yeah.
All right. So, Dick, thanks for joining me.
It's been great. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed the discussion.